Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Pesachim Daf Mem Hey contains a Mishnah, which divides the daf into two separate sugyas. The first sugya is the end of our discussion as to what happens when you have Isser, forbidden material, mixed into Heter, permitted material. What extent is the resulting mixture forbidden? As we've seen, there are two subtopics there, which we will get into. The Mishnah begins the sugya of what happens when you have a dough that's used as some non-food purpose. It's used as a cement, it's used as a filler, it's used as some other things. In what situations is it problematic and you have to get rid of it before Pesach? And in what situations is it not considered chametz and you don't have to worry about it? Okay, so first of all, we are in the middle of a discussion of Isser mixed into Heter. And as we have seen, there's a number of ways to relate to this Isser that's mixed into the Heter. Where you have a situation where the resulting mixture is forbidden. So why is that resulting mixture forbidden? You're not eating straight Isser if you eat that mixture. You're eating a mixture of Isser and Heter. So we're focusing on two approaches. One is Heter mitztaref l'Isser. That is, the forbidden parts of the mixture combine with the permitted parts of the mixture, and the permitted parts now count towards the minimum size, such that if I have a mixture of chametz in food, in heter, in non-chametz food, and eat a concise of the whole mixture, so the heter combines with the iser to form a size of a concise, and you're responsible for that. That, we said, is true in three situations of halacha only. It's true by chametz and Pesach, it's true by a nazir, where you have grapes that are soaked in water. The water now becomes the halacha of the grapes itself. That is actually the source for it. The pasuk which has mishras, that anything which has grapes soaked in it becomes aser. And the last situation where we saw that was being makar of chametz on the mizbech. Now, Rabbi Akiva had said that this halacha is stated by mishras, and it does not apply anywhere else besides for these three examples. Now, the Rabbanan said mishras is to teach us something else. Mishras is to teach us the concept of tam ke'ikar, which is the other way of looking at iser mixed into heter, that as long as it has the flavor of the iser, you are violating the halacha of not eating that iser. As long as you get that flavor, it's like you're eating the iser itself. Now, Rabbi Akiva had said that you learn heter mitzaref l'isser from mishras, and it does not apply anywhere else. The Rabbanan say you learn tam ke'ikar from mishras, and you learn from there to the rest of the Torah kol Torah kuli. It does apply everywhere else. The Gemara wants to know, how come Rabbi Akiva says mishras doesn't apply anywhere else, and the Chachamim say mishras does apply everywhere else? So the Gemara says the reason is as follows. The reason is because Rabbi Akiva is learning that mishras is to teach me tam ke'heter, is to teach me heter mitzaref l'isser, that the permitted material counts as iser. That is a halacha which appears elsewhere in the Torah, and therefore it appears twice. And the halacha is anytime something appears twice, it's to teach me that it's limited to these two places and not anywhere else, because it's extra. If you only said once, I would apply it everywhere. The fact that you say it again is to tell me only here and nowhere else. Where's the second place it appears? It appears by karbanis which touch each other. The halacha is that if a karban chatas, which has very strict halachas, it's only allowed to be eaten by male kahanim, it has to be eaten inside the Beis Hamikdash, and it's only allowed to be eaten for a day and a night. Those halachos apply to a carbon chatas. If a carbon chatas touches any other carbon which has more lenient halachos, like a carbon shlamim, which can be eaten in Hol Yerushalayim, can be eaten by non-kohanim, it can be eaten for 2 days and a night. So if chatas touches those other things, it limits the shlamim or the chulin or whatever it touches to the halachas of a chatas. Meaning, it's just like non-kosher meat touched kosher meat. Now the kosher meat gets the halacha of non-kosher, so the other meats get the halacha of the chatas. They're only kosher to when, to who, and where the chatas itself is kosher. It doesn't go further. Now this, the Torah says clearly, even though it just touches. Now when it just touches, all you have there is a little bit of heter, a little bit of iser that gets absorbed into that heter. We have a limit also that it's only if it's absorbed, not if it touches without absorption, because it says yikdash. Okay, but there's just a little bit there. So this teaches me that heter of the lesser strict carbon or the chulin meat is mitztaref to the iser, the carbon chatas. So the Gemara says these are two sources. Now that's why it's limited. The Gemara says, now what are the Rabbanan do? How come they say you could learn from mishras to everywhere else? So the Gemara says, remember, the Rabbanan are learning that mishras is for tam ke'ikar. That means that chatas is to teach me heter mitzaref l'isser, and Mishras is to teach me Tam Ke'ikr. Now, Heter Mitzdaref Le'Isser is only said by Chatas, the Rabbanan say. You cannot learn from Chatas to anywhere else, because Chatas is Kodshim, it's holy things, it's Karbanos, and those halachas are stricter, and therefore you cannot learn a strict halacha from there to anywhere else. You can't learn from there to Chulin or any other area of the Torah. However, where it says Mishras by the wine, that it was the water that was soaked with grapes of a Nazir, that's Chulin, and therefore I learned from there to everywhere else, and I learned Tam Ke'ikr to everywhere else, and the reason why I can do it is because there's no two psukim, there's only one. According to Rabbi Akiva, however, Tam Ke'ikr I learned from a totally different source. Tam Ke'ikr I learned from the fact that the Torah said you have to kasher the kelim which you conquered from Midian. That's where Tam Ke'ikr is from. Mishras is to teach me Heter Mitzdaref Le'Isser, and once it's said by Mishras, which is Chulin, I don't need to say it again by Chatas. The fact that it says it again by Chatas is to limit it. And that's where I know that it does not apply anywhere else. So now the Gemara has a kasha on Rabbi Akiva of a brisa that says that different Isurim for a Nazir combine together, such as if you have grape products, if you have the skins of the grapes, so it combines with sediment of wine. You eat half a kazayas of one, half a kazayas of the other. It combines together, and you violate the Isser. The Gemara says, "Why would I need a pasuk to tell me this? It's learned that in Kol Asher Yasem Megef and Yayin Mechatanim Ad Zag. So why do I need a pasuk to tell me that? According to Rabbi Akiva, even Heter and Isser combine to make the minimum size. Certainly Isser and Isser, why do I need it? The Gemara says no, because Isser and Isser has an extra structure halacha that Heter and Isser doesn't have. Heter and Isser only combines if you eat it together. Isser and Isser combines even if you eat them separately. You eat half a kazayas of one thing and then half a kazayas of the other thing, you still violate the Isser and it combines to one. That's what the Gemara teaches me from the pasuk of Mikol Asher Yas and Megef Nayayin. This takes us to the Mishnah, which introduces us to the topic of dough, which is used for a non-food purpose. Now, the case the Mishnah discusses is when you have a basket and the holes in the basket, the cracks between the woven fronds of the basket are filled by a dough. So the dough is meant to hold the basket together to seal up the holes. So the question is, the dough that's there, is that now considered to be chametz and it's a problem, or is it now considered almost like cement holding the basket together and therefore it's not chametz at all? Now, there's two factors involved here in order to figure out what the halacha of this dough should be. First of all, is it permanent? Do you plan to leave it there? Is it needed to be part of the basket? If you would, then it would make sense to say that it's batal. It's not considered to be food anymore. It's now cement. You in your brain have been mevatal it. You relate to it as cement, not as food. That's one factor. Another factor is how big is the piece? Is it a kizayis in one place, or is it a bunch of separate pieces and there's no kizayis in one place at all? If there's a kizayis, it's more like that it's chametz. If less than a kizayis, it's less like that it's chametz. Now, the Mishnah, interestingly, only talks about the size factor. The Gemara is going to say, well, what happened to the permanence factor? And the Mishnah, oddly, also brings in another halacha, and that is the basket, if it needs to be put in the mikvah, it has to have any foreign material removed. The dough that's there, is it planning on staying there? Are you planning on leaving it there? Or is it foreign material that has to be removed before you put it in the mikvah? There, it does bring in whether it's permanent or not. And it seems to connect the two halves of the Mishnah. The Gemara will ask that they're seemingly unconnected. So let's see the Mishnah. The Mishnah says if you have a basket that its cracks are filled with dough, so the Mishnah says it depends on size. If you have a kazayas in one place, you have to destroy it, it's chametz. You don't have kazayis in any one spot, no problem of chametz. Then the Mishnah says the same thing is true, and the Gemara will ask the same thing here doesn't make sense. The Gemara will say this is a really separate halacha. If you want to put it in the mikvah, it depends if you're planning on removing the dough or not. If it's permanent, then you're not planning on removing it. It's not a chatzitza. You could put it in the mikvah. If, however, you are planning on removing it, then you gotta take off the dough before you put it in the mikvah because it is a chatzitza. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know how do you factor in the permanence as far as the halacha of chametz, and there are two versions of this. Both are Rabbi Huda Amar Shmuel is the first version and the second version, and they are contradictory. How you factor them in? According to the first version, we factor it in leniently, and that is that we say that even if it is a large piece, that it's a kazayas or more, as long as it's permanent, it's meant to be left there permanently, you're mevatel it, and there's no problem anymore. According to the second version, no, we factor it in a small piece. If it's a small piece and you're not planning on removing it, if it's a small piece and you are planning on removing it, even though it's a small piece, because you're planning on removing it and you're not mavatal it, therefore it's problematic even though it's a small piece. Certainly if it's a large piece, it's problematic no matter what. So we end up having 4 cases. We have 4 cases. We have 2 factors. We have 4 cases. We have the extreme case where it's a big piece and it's temporary. There, it's for sure us, according to all versions. It's too big and it's not permanent. Therefore, you're not mavatal it there, and therefore it's for sure chametz. If, however, it is a small piece and it is permanent, then it has both factors going for it, and therefore you for sure don't have to destroy it. It's okay. The question, the machlokes between the 2 versions of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, is what happens when you have one factor going for you and one factor going against you. It's a large piece that you're planning on leaving there, or it's a small piece that is not permanent, it's not going to stay there forever, and you're not mavatal. What happens then? And that's the contradiction between the 2 versions. According to the first version, both of those are mutter, you don't have to destroy. According to the second version, both of those are aser. And the Gemara goes ahead and actually brings brises to support both versions. The brise explicitly says both versions. It also adds the halacha of chatzitza there. If it's permanent, then it's a chatzitza. If it's permanent, then it's not a chatzitza. If it's being removed, then it is a chatzitza. You have to get rid of it. And we have brises saying the 2 opposite halachas. So these 2 brises contradict each other in the 2 cases, where it's permanent and it's big, and where it is not permanent, but nevertheless it is small. So how are we going to resolve this contradiction? Now, just to flesh it out here, how can you tell if it's permanent or not? So the Gemara says, here's how you tell. Which part of the basket is it in? If it's in the bottom of the basket, then it's put there in order to really seal the basket. It's got to hold water. That's permanent. That's staying there, and that's much more likely to be not chametz anymore. If it's in the sides of the basket, however, then it doesn't need to hold water. It's just sides of the basket. It's just firming up the basket. It could be that you're going to remove it. So those are the cases where we have stira. Again, if it's the bottom of the basket, and therefore it's permanent, but it is larger than a kazayis, or if it is the sides of the basket and it's not permanent, but it is smaller than a kazayis, what do we do there? So the Gemara has 3 approaches to dealing with the contradiction. The first is Rav Huna. He says it's a contradiction, nothing to do about it. You got to get rid of the kula one, the first version. You got to go with the stricter version. Both middle cases have to be aser. Rabbi Yosef says, what, you ran out of Tanaim in the world? It's 2 different brises, 2 different Tanaim. Because we'll see a similar machlokes between Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and the Chachamim. What's that machlokes? It's talking about where you have bread which became moldy, people can't eat it anymore. So what's the halacha of bread like that? So the Chachamim say it's aser, and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says it's aser unless you turned it into some other device. It hardened it and became a chair. So then it's not a problem anymore because you're mavatal it. It's not your das anymore. So you see, they're arguing about a case where you have a larger piece than a kizayis, but you're using it for something else, you're mavatal it. That would be like our case of a big piece of a kizayis, but it's at the bottom of the basket, and therefore you're leaving it there, it's permanent, you're mavatal it to be something else. And you see there's machlokes about that. So that could be this machlokes here as well. So Abaye says, but that only helps for one of the cases that are a contradiction between the brises. That helps when it's larger than a kazayis and it's permanent. What about when it's smaller than a kazayis and it's temporary? You didn't solve that. So therefore, Abaye says that the truth is there are really 3 levels of permanence. There's the bottom of the kli, where it's definitely permanent. It has to stay there. It's needed to hold in even liquids that are in the basket. Then there's the size of the kli, the lower part of the size of the kli. There it has to be pretty solid, because when you're going to knead the dough, it's going to knock into the walls there, and it's got to be pretty strong. And then there's the higher ridge, the rim of the kli, the top lip, there it doesn't have to hold water. You're not going to need it there. You don't need the dough there at all. It's not likely to stay there very long at all. These are the 3 levels, and their halachos therefore is as follows. Everybody agrees that these are the halachos of the 3 of them. The bottom of the kli, it's definitely permanent. It's cement. It's going to stay there. It doesn't matter what size it is. It's completely permitted. The top of the kli is the opposite. It's not needed at all. It's very temporary, and therefore no matter what size it is completely aser. The middle, where you have to knead the dough on the side there, that's where the cracks are filled by the dough. That's where it depends on what size it is. If it's less than a kazayis, then it's okay, and if it's more than a kazayis, it's aser. Now, the 2 brises are not contradictory because they were talking about two different sets of cases. The first brisa that went leniently was talking about the bottom of the kli and the middle of the kli. So therefore, he said it's always permitted unless it's a large piece in the upper part of the kli, because the bottom of the kli is always mutter, like we said, and the upper part of the kli depends on size. So if it's a large piece, it'll be aser. Everything else is mutter. However, the second Tana, which we saw, the second brisa was referring to the top two parts of the kli. When he said where it's permanent, he meant the middle level. And there, it's only permanent enough if it is large. If it is a small piece, if it's a large piece, it's still aser. The top part of the kli, however, remains aser no matter what the size is, and that's why he says it that way. He says it's always aser unless it's in the bottom and it is a small piece, and there's no contradiction at all. Okay, now the Gemara defines what do we mean when we say the top of the kli. So the Gemara says it means the lip of the kli. It doesn't necessarily. You don't have to go as far as the back, the outside of the basket, even just the lip is okay. The Gemara says, for sure, why would I think not? You don't need the dough against the side of the kli. The Gemara says, yeah, but it rises, sometimes it goes up there, and therefore you might think that it is problematic. The Gemara now discusses the halacha of the machlokes between Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar and the Chachamim about the bread that was made into a chair. Do we say that it's still considered chametz, or do we say that it's batal from chametz, you don't have to destroy it anymore? So there's two versions of Rav Nachman Omer Rav's halacha. One is that he said that the halacha is like Rav Shimon. One is that he said the halacha is not like Rav Shimon. Now there's a statement of Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rashi quoting Rav where he says that it's only batal from being chametz if you smeared with cement. So according to the first version that he said the halacha is like Rav Shimon, this would be a contradiction to that, and it would be a different Amora who has a different quote of Rav. Well, in the second version, it supports it that the halacha is not like Rav Shimon. It's only if you smear it with cement that it is no longer considered chametz. Otherwise, it is still chametz, and you have to destroy it. Now the Gemara goes to the discussion of two kizesim, or two half kizesim of the dough, which we had said is not a problem if it's in the holes of the basket in the right circumstances. So Gemara says that Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel, if there's a thread of dough between them, does it connect them or not? Depends. If the thread is strong enough that if you pull the thread, you would pull out both of the pieces of the dough that it's connected to, then it is considered connected. If it would break, then it's not connected. Says Ula, all these halachos only apply in a basket, but if you have two kizesim anywhere in a house, they combine. Why? Because when you sweep the floor, they'll stick together like snowballs. So Gemara says, that's true if it's in one floor of a house. What if it's upstairs and downstairs? You don't really sweep them together. You have half a kazayas upstairs and half a kazayas on the ground floor. You don't really sweep them together, but they could end up becoming pushed together and combined. What do we say there? And if you tell me that that's okay, what would you say in the case where you have in the house and in the achsadra, the roofed pavilion outside the house? Do you say people might track it in on their feet and it'll get combined? And if you say that's okay, what would you say in the case of one house inside another house, meaning you have to pass through one house to get to the other house? It's more likely people will track it in. The Gemara says all these are teiku, we don't have an answer. Okay, now the Gemara discusses what happens if you have bread which became moldy, as we said before, and a person can't eat it, but a dog could eat it. So the Gemara says everybody agrees that the halacha is that it's tamei tumas eichlin. It definitely is considered food as far as the fact that it is tamei. Question is, can you be metamei it when you're burning it? Can you burn it together with tamei foods if it's truma? You're not going to be metamei truma, but if you're destroying it, you could. We'd seen a machlokes about that earlier. So Gemara says here, this is a little bit different because this is not edible for anybody. So maybe I could be metamei. So Gemara says in machlokes, Tanakama says that you could. Rabbi Nosson says you cannot. The Gemara now quotes a Mishnah which it says does not fit with Rabbi Nosson. Here we had seen that Rabbi Nosson says you cannot be metamei it as long as it is edible to a dog, even if it's not edible to a person. So Gemara says you have a Mishnah that says there's a rule with taharis. Anything which is food, it's something that a person would eat, but it gets ruined. It remains tamei, remains susceptible to tuma until it becomes so destroyed that it cannot be eaten by a dog at all. That again does not fit with Rabbi Nosson. Says the brisa, the Gemara brings a new brisa on the subject of destroying food. If you have flour and you put it in a basket where they tan hides, so flour goes in there and it smells terribly, the basket itself smells terribly, so it destroys the flour, you cannot eat it anymore. So the Gemara says it takes 3 days to destroy the flour. So if you put it in there within 3 days of Pesach, it's not destroyed yet and you have to do beer. If it's longer than 3 days, then it is destroyed. You don't need to worry about it anymore. Says Rabbi Nassan on that. That's as long as you didn't put in hides. But if you put in hides and it's actually in the tanning process, then it gets destroyed even within 3 days. Says again, Rabbi Pasuk and Halacha is like Rabbi Nassan, even if it's just a day, even if it's just an hour, as long as there's hides in there, it's in the tanning process. The chemicals are strong. It is destroyed. It's not considered chametz anymore. You don't have to.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.